Men have always had dreams and visions. They've had dreams of owning new homes. They've had dreams of owning fancy automobiles. They've had various types of dreams as far as the physical conditions in which they live is concerned. And many people in America especially have dreams of becoming a millionaire. And these types of dreams, I guess, have crossed every one of our minds. But what about somebody who has the audacity to think that they deserve to own the world, and that everybody on the earth should be their slave, and that everyone should live in a feudalistic serfdom type of middle-age slavery, where all production of all goods goes into their vaults, and they're the only ones that has the right and the illumination in their mind to control everything. This is happening in the world today. And we can see all over the globe, anywhere you get you a map, a modern day map, and you see the word Socialist Republic all over the globe. Where the red horse of the apocalypse, international socialism, red communism, is walking over the globe. They're subjugating nation after nation. And as a direct result, we see that this power base is coming about, just as was prophesied in the book of Revelation. But there is a wrong power base that is revealed in the Bible. We know that Jesus Christ and the God family, the Father, is the true power of the universe. They're the creator of all things. And yet there is in the Bible revealed a power base that we need to explore. So if we look carefully all over the world, we analyze the global tyranny that's taking place, despotism, terrorism, the failing money systems that's actually robbing every citizen of their buying power and their real wealth. If we look at the breakdown in morality in every society, and especially in the United States, especially in this country, the family breakdown, the breakdown in church and religion, surely we should be able to recognize that something evil is happening on a global basis. And the only way that we can actually understand what is taking place is if we will accept revealed knowledge, and that we will cast off the false system of scientific reasoning, which was introduced by Dewey in the educational system in the United States and in Europe for one purpose: to get rid of religion and any concept of the supernatural. Because this scientific measurement by which proves supposedly what a truth is simply says if you can't comprehend something by physical taste, sight, and so on, and you analyze it in the laboratory, then it doesn't exist. Therefore, God doesn't exist, and things supernatural doesn't exist. And yet we know that He does exist by the very things and the very actions that are taking place. But in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, the following statement is made. And this is Jesus Christ, the one who authored this through the Apostle John in vision. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now, throughout the Bible, it reveals over and over such things as supernatural angels. It also reveals that there is wind, there is air, there is invisibility on the earth that you cannot detect with a human eye. And yet, we're led to believe by those who have infiltrated into our system, infiltrated into churches, into our school system, that there is no such thing as a supernatural. And yet we can see such things as hurricanes, tornadoes, cyclones in the Far East, as they're called. And all of these are invisible substances working. And we may not actually be able to see these things, but you can see the results of them. So as a direct result, we know that there is such a thing as invisibility. Now in Matthew chapter 4, verse 8 and 9, Jesus is confronted by an invisible spirit being. He's known as Satan. Here's the way it reads. Again, the devil takes Jesus up into an exceeding high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. And Satan said unto Jesus, all these things, all of these kingdoms that he's showing him, will I give unto you, Jesus, if you will fall down and worship me. Right here we see revealed that there is an invisible being that's right now working in world affairs because he had the power and the capability and the authority, apparently at that time, to elevate Jesus to world dictator if Jesus would have bowed down, submitted himself, and admitted that Satan was God. But Jesus refused, and he was willing to accept death at the hands of those that Satan was using, his instruments for evil at that particular time. But where did Satan come from? And how is it that he had the power to elevate people today, as well as back in the Middle Ages, Babylon and so on, to world dictators? Well, in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 to 14, it reads like this. How are you fallen from heaven? That's where God's throne is, apparently. O Lucifer, son of the morning. So Lucifer did fall, which did weaken the nations. So here is someone who is undercutting and undermining the nations of the earth, and his name was called Lucifer. For you have said in your heart, I, Lucifer, will ascend into the heaven. I'll exalt my throne above the stars of God. I'll sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. So apparently this is the only indication we have where God's throne is located, the north of the earth. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. Now this is Lucifer thinking in his own mind, I will be like the Most High. And by inference, we can put in the word God, the Most High God. So Lucifer, or who became Satan, had an insatiable appetite. And this appetite was lust for power. He had a lust for power not only to rule the earth, but he wanted to literally rule the entire universe. That's why he wanted to ascend into the heights of the clouds. He wanted to overthrow God and take rulership from him. But now Jesus showed very clearly in Luke 10, verse 18, he said, and Jesus said unto him, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. So Satan and Lucifer both fell from heaven. They were cast out according to Revelation 12:9. So Lucifer must have become Satan. And this is invisibility. And yet this invisible being is undercutting the nations today. So apparently Satan and his demons were banished from the heavens, except for Job 1 shows that Satan does have access there to accuse the brethren. Now this same personality, Lucifer, who became Satan, rebelled in an attempt to control the entirety of the universe and all activity on this earth. Now in Ephesians 2, verse 2, you can read it for yourself. It says like this, wherein in times past you, and he's talking to Christians who were once held under the satanic sway of this world, he says, you Christians walked according to the course of the world, according to the prince of the power of the air. That's Satan. The spirit, and if you want to just put in brackets there, the spirit being, because that's revealed that Satan was cast out. Lucifer is undercutting the nations today. The spirit being that now works in the children of disobedience. So there is a wrong power base, and it is this ungodly deceiver that wants to destroy all humanity, bring them into a slave-like condition, feudalism, serfism, just like it was in the Middle Ages. They want to do this both militarily, economically, religiously, and in every facet of society. But now there have been in times past other governmental attempts to rule the world. Now before the flood, which came on the whole world to destroy everyone except Noah, who was considered as a righteous man, and his family, which was 8 people, plus the animals that they took, Satan made an attempt to enslave the entire world. Now when you look back in Genesis, the 6th chapter, you see that there was great difficulty. There was trouble. There was such anarchy in the world that it produced food shortages, famine, disease, anarchy, terrorism, political unrest. Human migratory patterns were disrupted. There was water shortages. In other words, by all of these things, a man began to come up and to create what we would call international socialism and communism in order to try to solve the problems. So it was world unrest. And God came down and he saw that there was total destructive forces in action on the earth. And he saw that he was going to have to destroy the earth. And it repented him that he had even made man. And as it says in Genesis 6, corruption and violence filled the earth. But that wasn't all. After the flood took place, a man by the name of Nimrod, the population explosion began to occur all over again. People began to repopulate just as God had told them to do. And in Genesis 10:8, it's revealed that a man by the name of Nimrod came on the scene. He rose from world obscurity to become the leader of all the populated earth at that time. He began to build cities, and one of them was called Babel, which in the Greek language is Babylon, and it means confusion. And so at this particular time, right after the flood, the animal population had outproduced the human population, because it takes 9 months to reproduce a human being when it only takes a few weeks or months to reproduce animals. So suddenly Nimrod began to rise out of obscurity. He became a mighty one. He became a hunter. He began to build cities with walls around him for protection. And so in order to hold his kingdom together, his mother wife, Semiramis, formulated a religion based upon the worship of the sun, which they claimed to be himself, only it was the S-U-N, the sun that the earth orbits. And this Satan-inspired religious or false religious system has passed on down today, and it holds people in religious bondage today, absolutely controlling their minds. It's called Mystery Babylon in Revelation 17:5. And this whole system is just like a political dictatorship in the religious area, because it absolutely puts an ironclad grip on your mind. This system tells you what you can know from the Bible and what you can't know. And it is an absolute dictatorship. And this is occurring in much of what is called the Christian world outside of the United States of America. And this particular religious system does not allow religious freedom in any country where it is the state religion. Now, this system has infiltrated into our system today by Christian-sounding names, and yet it is not. It is actually a system in order to enslave people religiously. And then Satan will also give rise to an end-time system that's going to control people politically and economically and militarily. But you see, there's a problem. People come on the scene, we die because we're human. But Satan doesn't die. He's spirit. So he goes on, plus he doesn't have to sleep. So he never quits. While you and I are sleeping, he can be on another part of the world, he and his cohorts called demons, and they can be subverting those nations at that time. But occasionally, according to the Bible, God does intervene in human affairs, and he'll give relief from some of the enslavement and the oppression which Satan and his demons are bringing upon the world. But every time, relentlessly, Satan and his demons goes back to work because he doesn't sleep. You see, he's spirit. So Satan gave rise to the first world ruling government, Babylon. And Daniel 2 describes the rising of these 4 world ruling governments. Then he gave rise to the Medo-Persian, then Greece, Greco-Macedonian Empire, and then the mightiest of them all unto this day, the Roman Empire, which was the most destructive and yet one of the most constructive. And that seems like a contradiction in terms. And yet they totally destroyed everywhere they went, and yet they built some of the most beautiful buildings and roads which are still in existence in Europe today. So they were both destructive and constructive at the same time. But in each time, and in each case, when this world government came on the scene, there was one major factor that solidified their empire. Not only religion, but it produced a world merchandising system where all the wealth of the empire in each of these cases would become concentrated in the hands of just a few people. The few powerful people who literally control the entire system. So what it provided for was incredible wealth and splendor for the few who were in charge. While on the opposite extreme, those who were subjugated lived in poverty, filth, squalor, slavery, and absolute servitude for the masses. And as a direct result, those who were in charge had very few problems with things like bubonic plague and those diseases that run rampant in the earth. And yet those who were subjugated and lived in filth and squalor and undernourishment because their food was confiscated, then they were the ones who always were hit hardest when plagues swept across the earth. But as Satan began to go ahead and give rise to other systems also, such as the merchandising system of Tyre, in every case, it always ended up being a global merchandising system. You have to read that in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 12 to 17. But in every case, when you study the rise of one nation as a world government, in every case, it always was accompanied by the sinister element of violence every time. And look at the world today, where the red horse of the apocalypse is running rampant over the earth. Nation after nation, and whole societies are systematically slaughtered and wiped out. It's called genocide. Well, every single time, violence occurs for the very reason to cause people to surrender their freedoms for a few moments of peace. And we always surrender our freedoms to those who have given themselves into the very hands of Satan. But Jesus prophesied that right before he would return at the very end of the age, there would come once again a global dictatorship. And once again it would be accompanied by merchandising monopoly, and it would be created through violence in most of the world. But how do we know it's going to occur in our day? There are definite scriptures that give timetables. And one of them is in Matthew chapter 24, verse 21 and 22. Here's what it said. For then, this is talking about the end of the age, which Jesus was asked about in verse 3, shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor shall ever be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. Now, this is the timetable that's going to take place right before the return of Jesus Christ. Now, this world dictatorship is now on the rise. It is literally occurring right now. And Jesus is going to return to destroy this particular system. Now, the prophet Daniel also foretold in the book of Daniel how that Jesus Christ would come, he would be destroyed and cut off. And I think we need to read a verse. Daniel 9, verse 26. And here's what it said. But he would be left without a kingdom, and then there would come at the end of the age a global dictatorship. But now, Daniel 9, verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. And if you read that in a more modern language, like the New International Version, it is very clear. This is talking about Jesus Christ would come. He would be destroyed. He would be killed and cut off. Not for himself, but for the sins of the world. And then the next statement shows that there will be coming another prince or another dictator that would destroy the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary. Now, a Roman prince by the name of Titus did come, and he destroyed Jerusalem in 70 A.D. And this brought Jerusalem under control of the Gentiles for 1,897 years until the 1967 Yom Kippur Six-Day War. And once again, Jerusalem was liberated and put into the hands of who call themselves Israel today. But we know they should wear the title House of Judah and not Israel, because they do claim to be from the tribe of Judah, which are Jews. But that particular war brought Jerusalem and the West Bank back under the control of the modern-day Israeli government. And so the people that destroyed Jerusalem and the sanctuary was not Jesus Christ, as some churches teach. It was not, but it was the Roman Empire and the Roman government and their armies. And this coming false Messiah at the end of the age is going to confirm an agreement with Israel, apparently, once again. And it's going to be a 7-year agreement. And I want to read this because it's very important. Daniel 9:27. I'm not going to read it in the King James Version, but I'm going to give a word in the Hebrew meaning of it first. In Daniel 9:27, there is the word week. And it literally means, from the Strong's Concordance, it means a week of years. So now let's read this. Verse 27 out of the New International Version. He, referring to this prince or ruler, which we know as a Roman prince at that time, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. This is 7 years, because there's 7 days in a week, and this is a week of years according to the Hebrew word. It's Shabbat. And so this false Messiah that's going to come, or this world dictator, will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And one who causes desolations will place abominations on a wing of the temple. Now, this very clearly is the same description talked about in Matthew chapter 24, verse 16, about the abomination of desolation sitting where it shouldn't. Why? Because it happened all the way back in 70 A.D., but it was only the forerunner with the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, and it was going to happen at the end of the age all over again. But now, let's read Daniel 12, verse 8 also. Notice now what it says. This is what will happen at the very end of the age, because Daniel was very frustrated. He didn't understand these prophecies. And so he asked, and he prayed, and he fasted probably, and he prayed for days and weeks, and he said, show me the meaning of this. And so in verse 8, he says, what will be the outcome of all of this? Then in Daniel 12, verse 11, here is practically a duplicate statement of what happened back in 9, verse 27. It says, from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished, and the abomination that causes desolation is set up. That's the abomination of desolation talked about in Matthew 24, verse 16. The same time period, all three of these verses coincide, would be 1,290 days, or 3.5 years. Now, there's been 2 destructions of Jerusalem so far, and the temple. Babylon did it, and also the Romans did it. That's at least twice that it occurred. But now, the next one will take place when this final dictator comes on the scene. And it's prophesied in Revelation chapter 13, 17, and Daniel chapter 2, 7, 11, and 12. All of those combine together to understand what's going to happen at the end of the age. Now, unfortunately, Israel is going to be suckered in, and they're going to believe, that's little Israel in the Middle East, who should be called House of Judah. They're going to be suckered into this, and they're going to accept this personality called the beast as their Messiah, at least for a certain portion of time. But now, look what is prophesied in the New Testament concerning that last period of time in the Middle East. Luke chapter 21, verse 22 to 24. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written might be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and this is the land in the Middle East, this particular setting right here, and wrath upon this people. And what people? The very next phrase tells us. And they, this people, shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And according to Revelation 11, verse 2, it's very clear that it's going to be for the last 3.5 years when this beast power is going to rule the whole world. Because it says that they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months, which is 3.5 years. And that corresponds with Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, Daniel 9, verse 27. And in other words, the very last 3.5 year period of this 7-year treaty or covenant that this beast power or world leader is going to make with Israel, guaranteeing their safety, this ruler, who is called the beast, will actually stop in the middle of this 7-year covenant the daily sacrifices, and he'll tread down Jerusalem for the last 3.5 years. And this is going to be called the Great Tribulation period that's going to come upon the whole world. Now, let's notice something else, though, in Daniel 12, verse 1, which will once again give us the time setting to prove all this. It says, there will be a time of trouble such as never was, since there was a nation even to that same time. And this corresponds with Matthew 24, verse 21, 22. So all of these scriptures are dovetailing into the very end of the age, the last 7-year period, and specifically the last 3.5 years. Then this personality called the beast is going to set himself up in the temple in Jerusalem after he's broken this covenant, And then he's going to literally demand that he be worshiped as God. Now, let's take a look at Daniel 11, verse 36 and 37. And the king, that's this beast power, shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. That means even false gods, Buddhas, Shintoism, the alligators of the Nile that's worshipped as God, reincarnation, all of that, even the true God. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor any God. For notice the last phrase in verse 37. For he shall magnify himself above all. This is what's going to take place. A human being elevated into the ranks of the gods. This is called apotheosis. And this is exactly what's mentioned even in the protocols when they finally come into their world government. Now notice also how this corresponds with 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4. Talking about this great ruler who's going to come into the church. He's going to exalt himself. He who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God. That sounds like Daniel, and yet it's coming from the New Testament, 2 Thessalonians. So that he will sit as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. So both the Old Testament prophecies and the New Testament correspond. And this false Messiah, and many people have called him the Maitreya, but we don't know who he's going to be, his exact name, but he's going to deceive those individuals who have been waiting for a Messiah for centuries. That's how he's going to plunge the whole world into this end-time Holocaust, this great tribulation that's going to be focused mainly in the Middle East on Jerusalem and what we call today the Jewish people. But the beast's time, is it time for him to come on the scene? I think we need to ask some very conclusive questions to see if right now this false Messiah, this world dictator that we call the beast, is he making preparations right now to come on the scene and establish his global government. Because this government is going to have four particular facets to it. Militarily, political, religious, and economically. All four of them. Now, God gave Nebuchadnezzar a dream, and he revealed all of this all the way back in Daniel, the 2nd chapter. Now, I'm not going to go through this. I'm only going to summarize it and so I can get into the message today. All this is simply introduction. But in Daniel chapter 2, verse 32 and 33, Nebuchadnezzar saw this great image, and it had a fine head of gold. And then it had a breast and arms of silver. His belly was and thighs were of brass, and his legs were iron. And then his feet, which has 10 toes, was of iron and part of clay. And he goes on and describes what it's going to be. The head would be the Babylonian government. The next government that came up, which was of inferior value, would be the Medo-Persian government. And then the brass, which is yet inferior to either gold or silver, would become the Medo-Persian, or not the Medo-Persian, but the Greco-Macedonian Empire. And fourth, the iron government would be the Roman Empire. And then it would split, literally split by the legs. And it would have two separate capitals, Constantinople in the eastern capital, and Rome, a western capital. And then the 10 toes. And this 10 toes would come up together at the end of the age. This, once again, this global government, and it would be split economically, because these 10 toes would be partly brittle and partly strong. And when you look at the Club of Rome today, there are 10 global groupings. The European Economic Community and all nations in Europe is only one of the groupings from which this end-time beast government is operating. And of course it's operating on every nation on earth, but the headquarters of it in Brussels is only one aspect of it, and that's where the end-time huge computer will be. But they show that there is 10 global groupings, and they're grouped according to economics. Economics. 4 of them are very strong economically, 1 slightly inferior, and then 5 other global groupings of nations are all economically depressed, what we would call the 3rd and 4th world nations. But the important thing, the reason I'm mentioning this, is because in Daniel 2, verse 44, this is the most important part. It's leading up to it. And in the days of these kings, these 10 world global groupings, that is going to be a total world government, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and it'll stand forever. This is what we're all looking forward to, so that you and I can wear crowns. We can be a part of that holy nation, the God family that's going to rule this earth, and finally, at long last, bring peace. Now, I want to give a quote from the Review of the News, December 3rd, 1975. This was on page 47, to show that there is a movement toward one world. There is. Now, this was a Dutch motion for one world. That was the headline on this newspaper article. A new move toward a one world government was recently initiated by Holland. The motion introduced by a socialist, and what is it all over the world right now that's taking peace from the earth? Red socialism, communism. The motion introduced by a socialist deputy in the Netherlands Assembly was passed on to the Common Market Commission in Brussels, where it received approval by the Commission. The Dutch motion called for a European election on the first Sunday of May, 1978. Now that was postponed, but it did take place. On that day, 355 members would be elected to a federal European Parliament, which, if all goes as planned, will unite Western Europe under a single socialist government. The term of office would be 5 years, and a socialist communist majority would be inevitable. This has already taken place. It's been operating for several years, but it has not had the supreme power which they envision to give this particular system. So it hasn't come into full fruition as of yet. Now, there is a very serious intent on bringing about a world government. And there is an article that I want to quote from now that verifies this intent for bringing about a world government. It was found in the Fort Lauderdale News, July 25th, 1978. I'm going to read part of it, because this is very important in getting down to the very last statement of this. Finance ministers of the European Common Market are meeting in Brussels to discuss ways to establish a new monetary system designed in part to make the community less vulnerable to United States dollar fluctuations. And what's happening today is that the European economic community, the socialists, are trying to divest themselves of partnership with the United States. That way, if they can isolate the United States, European continent will go into the socialist world government, and it will have us totally isolated, so that the whole world will have a socialist government, and we're the only one left. And then they can blackmail us into either accepting willingly or else war in order to bring us into the world nation, world government. I'll continue the quote. The system, which would set up a European monetary fund with its own currency, was approved in principle at the Common Market Summit in Bremen earlier this month and was raised at the Western Summit in Bonn last week. The European leaders told their finance ministers to have the plan ready by the end of October. And now it's called Euro dollars. They do have their own currency, but it still hasn't isolated the United States as much as they wanted to. But how much is our own leaders in government, high office in the United States involved in this? I want to give another quote from the same Fort Lauderdale News, June 21st, 1978. Carter, and that's former President Carter, born-again Christian, remember that. Carter is concerned about what he calls organizing a new world structure of peace, which means working with NATO allies and with Japan to control the trade and monetary chaos in the world, to encourage the European allies to use their influence to avoid racial and tribal violence in Africa, to urge the Chinese to come out of isolation and take a part in creating, and get this, a new world political order. This was our born-again Christian Jimmy Carter, and this was a direct quote about him. So Jimmy Carter's foreign policy in promoting a world government was not really new, because anyone who's kept up with economic or political affairs know that Mr. Henry Kissinger, the entire length of time that he was an advisor and Secretary of State of the United States, moved as fast as possible to bring the United States into a loosely knit world government by the end of the 70s. Now I want to give another quote from December 1974, Paul Scott's article in the Washington News. Here's what he said. Whether he fully realizes it or not, President Ford has put his stamp of approval on Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's grand design foreign policy for the establishment of a loosely knit world government before the end of the 1970s, by calling for the development of a global strategy and policy for food and oil within the framework of the United Nations. The President clearly signaled his acceptance of the new international order being sought by Kissinger. Can there be any doubt when statements like this are publicized, and yet most people overlook and don't even read newspapers, that there indeed is government approval in Washington, D.C. to dissolve our sovereignty and merge us into a world government which we know is going to be called the beast? But you have to think about something. Presidents rise and fall in the United States. They're elected. And yet government officials who are sent there and never voted upon continue to stay in Washington, D.C. year after year after year. And this is exactly why our government policy never changes toward merging us into a world government, no matter who becomes president. Even President Reagan, who received a 76% consensus of the American vote to change things, but nothing changed. And this year, if anyone watched the Republican convention, they know that there was the most conservative convention that has ever happened since World War II. And they're calling for total Christian virtues and morals once again, and a reversal. And yet you wait and see. Nothing will change. It can't change as long as the same people are in office. Well, now let's go and see what the final power base is going to be, and let's begin to see if it is being placed right now, all of the facets of it in place for this false world government. It's going to be called the kingdom of God, because this person is going to enter into the temple. He's going to claim to be God. In Revelation chapter 13, he reveals there are 4 specific bases of power which he's going to have in order to create a world government. Number 1 is the military base. This is verse 4. And they worship the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? Then in verse 7, it tells about the political power base. It says, And power was given him over all tongues, kindreds, and nations. Then in verse 8, it talks about the religious power base. All that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So this is religious. And then when you drop down, of course, another beast rises who is going to be working hand in glove with him. It's going to be the false religious system, and it's going to be the false prophet, as he's called, who's going to do miracles before the beast, and he's going to deceive the whole world. He's going to establish an image to the beast. And this couldn't even been understood until recent years. But now in verse 16 and 17, the economic base. For he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, say he that has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Computers definitely will be used to control all people. In Revelation 13, verse 14, listen to this. This is this great false prophet that's going to work miracles before the inhabitants of the earth, before the beast. He's going to deceive the inhabitants to think that the beast is literally the Messiah that's long been waited for, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast. In verse 15, And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. This is going to be more than likely, and I'm not going to say this dogmatically, we're going to have to continue to watch to see what's happening. But today, they can literally make computers that look just like a human being. They can exactly duplicate you as a person so that you can stand there, two people standing by each other, only one of them is a computer, and you won't even know the difference. And now they have even created electronic talking through these computers. And so this is a possibility, an image to the beast that would it'd be an exact duplication of this world dictator so that you wouldn't know whether it was him or this image, and you would be required to worship it. But let's go on just a little further, because there is coming a cashless society, and after I've given a couple of quotes, I want to read a letter from someone who works at the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis, Missouri, confirming everything I read to you right now. There is coming a cashless, checkless society, which we've been talking about for about 4 years. However, I want to bring you up to date. The Associated Press from Washington, D.C. had this statement: large-scale invasion of an individual's privacy by government agencies will be possible when electronic transfers replace cash and checks in the near future. A government commission was told Tuesday. This was testimony before government Senate hearings. I'll continue with a quote. The electronic transfers, already in limited use and expected to be widespread within a few years, will permit a grocery store, for example, to deduct simultaneously and instantly the cost of foodstuff from the purchaser's bank account. I'll continue with the quote, next paragraph. But the computer storage of the individual's accumulated purchases would make possible unprecedented feats of surveillance. Big Brother, when this cashless society comes and every dime you own in the world is listed on a computer ledger sheet, and you can't keep your amount of money from the government. They're going to know everything you do, every transaction you make. But let's go ahead. The banking industry is going total electronic funds transfer as fast as possible. To be exact, on my recent trip to Alabama, I met a friend that I hadn't seen in years and years, and he has grocery stores all over the state of Alabama. And the banking industry is putting tremendous pressure on them right now to either go into the total electronic transfer of funds or go out of business. And he is doing banking with different banks now and trying to forestall the inevitable, him being put out of business. However, I want to quote now from a recent publication put out by the Graduate School of Banking at the University of Wisconsin. I quote, "The financial industry today is involved in the most far-reaching development program in the history of modern banking. Electronic fund services with electronic technology creating a new kind of banking to put the future in your hand through use of a plastic debit card and the computerized system it activates." I want to stop there just for a moment before I continue the quote. Mr. Darrell Dunn, who is, I think, a Baptist minister somewhere down in the South, Tennessee or some area like that, has reported that the United States government has contracts as far back as the late 70s and 1980 with a pharmaceutical company in the state of Florida. The contract called for the development of plastic or a liquefied agent which would become solid under the skin. And the way it would work, it would be liquefied, and they would put under the skin on each side of the hand or in the forehead this liquid, and it would become solid. Now, this particular credit card, as it would be called, would be underneath the skin, and you couldn't see it. This substance would be so durable you could hit it with hammers. You can actually wad it up in your hand, and it will come back to its normal shape without breaking. It will not break. And the plan is, and they've already tested it in a bank in Maryland. They put this under the hand. You have a plastic card, and they use laser beams to put numbers, and it will not hurt the flesh, but it puts it on the plastic underneath the top layer of the skin. And they used it to open vaults in Maryland. This is already scientifically developed, and they're ready. And also, the same man, Mr. Dunn, stated that he had over 60 telephone calls in 1980 and 1981 from various parts of the United States from people who had received Social Security checks where it stated on the back that they could not be cashed without a special mark on the right hand or forehead. And of course, the Social Security agency said that's not true. They denied it. But you see, the Social Security agency is the one that sends out Social Security checks to everyone that receives them. And yet this was 60 separate people from separate parts of the United States. And I even have a minister friend in North Missouri who stated that his relatives in Arkansas, one of them received a check but would not let me have a notarized statement from them documenting it because they were afraid for their life. And so this is real, and it's happening in our day. Now, let me go on with this quote from the University of Wisconsin School of Banking. A plastic card or other transmittal device, remember that, can be used to activate the machinery of the electronic funds transfer network, providing the link between a bank or other financial institution and its customer. Information encoded on the card includes customer identification, account numbers, and other data needed to permit deposits or withdrawal at a variety of terminal locations, both within and outside the institution. And as of 1984, reports came to me from California that they now have nationwide transmittal where you can use your card in the state of California when they're issued and transmit money from your account instantaneously within a matter of seconds. So this is now hooked up nationwide and ready to go. But now let me go ahead. Thus the transaction is completed in seconds electronically without the necessity of checks, passbooks, deposit slips. Now when's this going to take place? Well, it is right on the brink right now, and they're putting pressure on businesses all over the country to get in on this first. To be exact, on my recent visit to Alabama to visit my parents, my own father, who receives his retirement check, now has all funds electronically transferred to his bank account, and a receipt is sent to him showing the deposit has taken place. And the thing is, he thinks it's wonderful. He has no concept of the consequences down the line that's going to happen, and a total dictatorship that will dictate every facet of your life. Now, I want to go on with another quote before I read this letter. A huge headline in the Pittsburgh Press, July 16th, 1978, read like this: Automated clearinghouse system going national. Here's a little of the quote. The dream of a cashless society, one in which salaries, wages, and bills are paid electronically, will inch closer in September when the Federal Reserve Board's automatic clearinghouse system goes national. After the nation's 32 automated clearinghouses are linked, the target date is September 11th. That was 1978. It will be possible for credit and debit transactions to be made electronically from virtually any place in the United States to any other. And that's now a truism. Now, electronic funds transfer systems are already being established, as you and I know, when you go into such places as Snooks in St. Louis and other retail outlets all over the country. Now, there's been one problem with this whole system, though. That is that people have a tendency to have their cards stolen. So they're going to make sure that it'll be impossible for this to happen when they literally put the marks on the right hand or forehead. Because every one of us has read Revelation 13, 16, and 17 many times. He calls us all to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead. Now, it's also very interesting. I took the time to look up the word in Greek. It's en, and you look at all the various ways that it can be used. It can also be used as within, like within the right hand or forehead. That would be a proper use of that term. So it might not be literally on the outer skin but invisible to the human eye. It could be within the right hand or forehead through this plastic that would be liquid and put into the skin, and then it would solidify, and then you would use the laser beams for the markings. I think all this is interesting. The reason why is because 28 miles from my hometown of Anniston, Alabama, is a city called Gadsden, Alabama. In the Gadsden Times, March 9th, 1976, this quote came from it. Huge headline, electronic check depositing will be extended nationwide. The electronic deposit of Social Security checks into savings and checking accounts will be extended nationwide by the end of the year 1976. Notice who said it. A Treasury Department official said, the new deposit system eliminates the paper check entirely. And this article went on to explain about the future. Quote, eventually all regular federal payments. You want to work for the government? You want to get a check from the government? They're going to be the first ones sucked into the system forcibly, or you have no money. Eventually, all regular federal payments will be included in the system. It didn't say one, or if you wanted to receive yours that way. It said all, which is a part of an overall trend toward electronic banking. And I believe this is going to happen, and it's leaping upon us right now. They were shooting for 1984. They didn't quite make it. But we're going to watch very carefully for the next couple of years. Now, is this developing right now in the United States? Now, this is very sobering, because in 1977, in December, a supplement to Circular E of the Employer's Tax Guide put out by the federal government came out, and on page 6, this is what it said. Box 12, IRA, which is individual retirement accounts. Anybody have an individual retirement account? This is what it says. Box 12, IRA code for IRS use. If box 6 is an IRA payment, so you're putting into your individual retirement account, enter 666. Identify the kind of payment by showing one of the following code numbers after 666. Why is 666 there? Because it's the code that puts you into the computer system. Then each number after that identifies 0 for a normal account, 1 for a premature, 3 for disability, 4 for death, 6 for other. So in other words, here's the way it would read if you wanted to show disability. 666 and then the number 3. For any other, 666 and then another 6. So the first 3 numbers is 666 that puts you into the system. I think we can all read Revelation 13 verse 18 that the number 666 is going to be involved in the beast, and it's going to be the number of his name. I guess when you add up the numerical value of his number of his name, it's going to add up to 666. But it's also going to be a part of this electronic transfer of funds that's coming on right now. I want to read now this letter from a lady at the Federal Reserve System right here in St. Louis. I listen to your broadcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on radio station KXEN in St. Louis. I have to tell you that your broadcast is very interesting and fulfilling. I love the broadcast on the electronic transfer of funds from Culpeper, Virginia. I know that this information is true because I work at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Please keep my name confidential. It's true, and it's verified by the employees right there where I've brought before that in Culpeper, Virginia, underground there is a facility where we, right here in St. Louis and Culpeper, are linked to Brussels, Belgium by satellite, where every transfer you make goes straight to Culpeper or to St. Louis, and then by satellite to Brussels, Belgium right now. It's true. Well, there appeared in the National Geographic in November 1970, I printed this before on page 631, the introduction of the huge ILIAC-4 computer, which stated that when this went into operation, it would transact over 1 billion operations a second. With the Earth pushing toward 5 billion people, don't you think that there would be enough capacity in one of these computers so everybody on Earth could make a transaction once every 5 seconds? And of course we know that's not going to occur. So this system right now that's ready for use could control all electronic buying and selling through satellite straight to Brussels, Belgium, from any place on the face of the earth. Now let's go one step further to see how close we are. There was a huge headline in the newspaper called Communication News, June of 1977. It said, "Worldwide Banking System Set Up." Here it is. Talking about the Bank of America on page 70, it says, Bank of America adds Asian link to World Telecommunications Network. First worldwide banking system. The new link to Asia makes Bank of America the first bank to have a worldwide centralized interactive computer system. And the article went on to show that it is through the use of such huge computers like Elliott 4 and Star 100, which is in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that makes it possible for such things. Now also, there was an article that came out in the Chicago Tribune on September 14th, 1982. Section 1, page 19. It was written by William Safire, and the title was, in huge letter, "The New Computer Tattoo." And they said, in our own government of the United States, legislation has now been passed. This was back in 1982. And it was under the guise of trying to control illegal aliens coming in from South America due to socialist communist activity in overthrowing the governments there. And they would flood across our borders. And they said that this legislation was introduced under the guise of controlling illegal aliens. But what they said was that they are trying to issue every single person in the United States a national identity card, so that you can't do anything without showing that national identity card. And then he went on to say that much of this cover-up of using illegal aliens as a reason for introducing this legislation was only intended to help the medicine go down. And that's his words. And the very last statement of this whole thing, this legislation for a national identity card aimed at undocumented workers, the computer tattoo, and listen to this, will be pressed on you and me. Okay, this is very interesting. Well, I want to go on just a little more, though. And not very much more. And incidentally, the people up in Maine that sent that 14-page letter said, don't say that anymore because they don't get enough up there. So I guess I'll stop using this. Is getting long. But anyway, in Revelation chapter 13, once again, verse 16 and 17, it said that it would be placed on the right hand or forehead, and it would be a mark. Now, the Greek word for mark is charagma, and it literally means to scratch, an etching, a stamp, or a sculpture. And isn't that exactly what your laser beam is that makes sculptured lines on the plastic if it's put underneath the skin, or even on the skin itself? Well, this mark can't be seen with the naked eye, and it's permanent. Absolutely permanent. Now, there has been teachings by various church organizations through the years that has not accepted this new information about electronic transfer of funds. And they're our brethren, but they just haven't come up to date on what's going on yet. And they have always taught that that it would be a currency, paper currency, like the German mark. That's what the mark of the beast would be. They knew it had to do with economics, buying and selling. But they thought it would be a German mark or French franc, which means mark in French. But it can't be. Because of all the headlines we've seen and that I've read to you, it's going to be a cashless society with computers for credits and debits. All they do is put how much money you've got on a computer sheet, you make a transaction, it subtracts that amount from it. And they always have your balance within 2 or 3 seconds. It's there every single time. So it is going to be a computerized, cashless society with the use of marks, which we see on, like the Universal Product Code today. Now, to close down the sermon for today, start closing it. I'll quote once again from the U.S. magazine Senior Scholastic, September 20th, 1973. This was when they started introducing the whole concept to the younger generation in America so they would grow up and be programmed to accept this. It said that this new monetary system would, in order for it to become fully operational, it needed 4 or 5 things. Number 1, all consumer goods must have a computer mark called the Universal Product Code, which they introduced right after this. Number 2, all selling and buying must be done by computer. Number 3, the special drawing rights must become the standard medium. That's your numbers on the ledger sheet. Doing away with checks and currency. Number 4, every individual must receive a personal number, which would be his account in the national and international computer system. And now it's already linked now that Asia has come into it on a global basis. And number 5, it said the number must be tattooed on the individual. You want verification? Take a trip to the World Trade Building in New York City. Right on the walls of the World Trade Building are huge plaques showing that step by step the new international monetary system will take place. And they state, first of all, we have to start having plastic credit cards. Reduce all of our credit cards to one world card, which is now going to be MasterCard, because the religious community came up with the idea that Visa, the V in one language was 6, the S-I or I-S was in another language was 6, and the A in the English language was A, or 6, so that's 666. So now they're downplaying Visa and they're building MasterCard as the world card, if you'll see on television commercials. And so eventually all credit cards will be done away but one. And then on the World Trade Building, it said that the next step would be to get rid of cards and have it on the human body. So it is taking place all over the world today. Now I'll give the direct quote from September 20th, 1973, Senior Scholastic. All buying and selling in the program will be done by computer. No currency, no change, no checks. In the program, people would receive a number that had been assigned them tattooed on their wrist or forehead. The number is put on by a laser beam and cannot be felt. The number in the body is not seen by the naked eye and is as permanent as your fingerprint. All items of consumer goods will be marked with a computer mark, and we know that's the Universal Product Code. The computer outlet in the store, which picks up the number on the items at the checkout stand, will also pick up the number in the person's body and automatically total the price and deduct the amount from the person's special drawing rights account. And this system that is going to do this on a global basis is located in Brussels, Belgium, the headquarters of the Common Market Building owned by Guy de Rothschild, who happens to be in international banking, and he heads it up. And the funny part is that no nation as yet has even protested the installation of this world computer. That tells you that every government on earth and its leaders got into office because they are behind this world system. Now, on May 2nd, 1974, the United Nations formed the new International Economic Order. The plans had been drafted. They released the publications, how it would work all over the world. And now, here's what they said. We, the members of the United Nations, solemnly proclaim our united determination to work urgently, and that word urgently, they meant it, for the establishment of a new international economic order based on equity, sovereign equality, interdependence, that means all nations hooked up and linked together so that nobody can stand against this new world government. Common interest and cooperation among all states, irrespective of their economic and social system. So it is happening. Our own president at that time, who was taken away because of the Watergate scandal, on his tapes, and I quote the following statement, when he was asked why we wouldn't try to stabilize our currency, he says, because we're going to get a new money system. End of quote. Now in Revelation chapter 14, verse 9 and 10, it says this, if anyone worships the beast as the false Messiah and his image and receives his mark on the forehead or the right hand, he too will drink the wine of God's fury. Brethren, we under no circumstance want to take part in this system that's coming. Under no circumstance. I want to end with just one scripture today. Jesus said that we should be comforted because, see, if you are Christ, it's Christ living inside of you, His life over by the power of His Holy Spirit. And this is a mystery. And you look up the word mystery, the Greek word, and it means secret. This is the secret that's going on in the world today. Christ in you. He's reproducing Himself through you and me. And if you are in Christ, notice what He says in Luke 21 verse 28. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up. Lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. Brethren, let's pray for that redemption.